When I look at the work we do, the parents, the children who have lost a lot of hope in their lives, even by talking to them, spending time with these parents, doing just the small things to them, it really brings in a lot of hope to them. Hope is the driving force in life.
Welcome to Unlikely Gifts, a podcast for anyone looking for hope amid difficult circumstances. Life can be beautiful, unexpected, and at times profoundly difficult. It helps to hear from others who have grown from life's challenges and joys. That's why Leonard and Cynthia Bauer are sharing how their experiences working with families impacted by disabilities in Africa have taught them about life's most amazing gifts and its hardest tragedies. These are Unlikely Gifts.
Hello and welcome back to Unlikely Gifts. I'm Frank Boswell. I'm joined by Cynthia Bauer and Leonard and the co-founders and directors of Kapenda for the Children. Kapenda is a Swahili word for love, and the organization Kapenda exists to replace beliefs that are harmful about disability with beliefs that improve people's lives. We're glad to see both of you, Cindy and Leonard, and we're talking, we've been covering a whole lot of areas having to deal with suffering over the last few sessions, and we're talking today about hope. So I'm going to kind of bend the meaning of that word just for fun to ask you something at the outset. I wonder what you hoped you would be when you grew up. What did you want to be or do? What did you dream of as a little boy or girl?
Well, I think I started to dream of what I wanted to be when I got to secondary. That is in the secondary level. And I was always thinking that, if I finish my education, I would be a doctor. That was my thinking that time. And when the results were out, things started to change because it became very competitive to join those colleges for medicine. And likely enough, I got an opportunity to join education, and I said, well, this is fine. I can be a teacher. So otherwise, I really wanted to be a doctor by the time I was in school.
Oh, it's interesting. Okay. What about you, Cindy?
Well, ever since I can remember, I always wanted to be something working with animals. I think I had dolphin trainer, veterinarian, that kind of thing. But it was pretty early on that I had decided I wanted to be a wildlife biologist. And I did become one. So that was what I always wanted. I wanted to go to Africa and save the animals and be amongst them and be accepted by them like I saw in the movies. That was always my dream.
So you did do that. How long did you get to do that?
Technically, I'm still a wildlife biologist, I guess, but I graduated with a wildlife biology degree for my undergrad, worked as a biology assistant down at the Florida Panther Refuge, where I rode around on a four-wheeler in the middle of the swamps of Florida, counting mice and orchids and all kinds of things like that for the Fish and Wildlife department. And then I went back to graduate school with a degree in wildlife conservation in Kentucky, of all places, because that was the place that was going to allow me to do my thesis work in Kenya, because I had always felt really strongly about the wildlife conservation in Africa. And there was an opportunity in Kenya working with a Christian conservation organization. And then after I graduated from there, that's where I studied the golden-rumped elephant shrew. And looked at how illegal deforestation was affecting it. And then I went back to after my thesis was over and my research and all that stuff, I actually worked as a wildlife biologist for the Army Environmental Center, of all places, for about 5 years, which is where I met Lauren, got connected to people in Maryland. So I worked in a headquarters position for a program where we actually conserved large tracts of land near military bases. So I was always the one in the middle between groups like the Nature Conservancy and the Army to find places to compromise so that we could all protect military as well as conserve endangered species. And so I actually, so that's and it helped me have tools you never would have known to be able to do this kind of work, because I learned how to make budgets in that position. It was a headquarters position, and learned how to connect people who don't normally connect with one another and resolve conflict.
I can hear your enthusiasm and passion for it. I don't know. I spent one summer working for the agriculture department, sweeping fields for insects, and it cured me of ever wanting to ever do anything remotely like that. So, and I thought I was going to be a test pilot, so I think I missed it by a wider margin than either of you did. Well, we do have hopes and dreams, and they sustain us. And I want to segue over to the idea of hope in the work that Capenda is doing. I was studying your website, and I was just found it very eye-opening, some of the stories that you had about, children that are isolated, that can't communicate, or they're ostracized because of the disability. Vast majority of them don't get to go to school. And then you talk about how even a simple thing like an assistive device of some sort can be absolutely transforming because it gives people hope. And I remember hearing John Perkins. I don't know if our audience is familiar with him, but he's well-known civil rights advocate for the poor here in the States. I think he's still alive and in his 90s. And I heard him speak years ago about the problems in the inner city, and I could rattle off a dozen problems, but I never pinpointed this until he said it. He said the central problem is hope. That's what he didn't talk about economics or other things, but he just talked about hope. And I wondered, how do you view hope in relation to the work at Capenda? Is it a big deal?
I think without hope, what do we have, right? Without hope, I'm not sure we can continue on, right? But that's the last thing, I think. If we don't have that, I don't know you can function. I think there's been those days when, I think for both Leonard and I, when we've had hard times, hope has been challenging to find. But then we can just feel like there's a lot of despair when there is no hope. There needs to be hope.
And in my work, there's a triad of virtues, the Bible: faith, hope, and love. Mm-hmm. And you hear people reference faith a lot. You hear them reference love. I'm not sure I hear people mention hope as much, or if they do, that they really know what they're talking about. But what are your thoughts on this, Leonard, about hope and its importance in your work?
To me, hope is the driving force in life. Because I believe if you have that hope, you will always be in the position to struggle to see things happen because you are being driven by that hope. But as soon as hope stops, then I don't think you will be there at all. You'll not be doing anything. And when I look at the work we do, we have people like the parents, the children, who have lost a lot of hope in their lives, particularly when they see the sufferings that their children are going through. But I have realized that even by talking to them, spending time with these parents, doing just the small things to them, it really brings in a lot of hope to them. For example, as you have said, a wheelchair is something very small. But look at a parent who has been all the time carrying the child on his or her back all that time. Today, he's got a wheelchair, the child is there, the child can move on his own or her own. He can also wheel that child. At least it brings in a lot of hope. So throughout the work we do, I think the most important thing as we are working with these families is hope. When they see hope, they feel relieved. And even when their children are doing something small, they are performing an activity that they never believed their children would do, it gives them hope. And this is what makes them to continue even serving the children and even looking for services from different places and so on. Otherwise, if that hope was not there, I don't think any parent or even others, Kuhenza and Kupenda, would struggle to continue serving these children. No.
That is as vivid a description as I've heard. Tell me, what are there certain stories? Is there a big story that jumps to mind for either one of you about the role of hope that you've seen in someone's life? Kind of a big question, but I can't not ask it.
I think some of the families and the kids themselves are when they're actually even just at the very beginning of connecting with, say, people that have been in our workshops or Kuhenza itself, and we actually share with them. Actually, I know, I'll go back. Well, in general, like when we share with them that they actually are human, that they actually have rights, that there's possibility, for them, it's the first time they've maybe had hope that things might improve for their life and the life of their family. And that hope is the first step of actually making those improvements, enrolling their kids in school. And they see it sometimes by the examples of others. They see other kids who've been included in school. They see other kids included in the life of the church or the community, and show that, oh, that's possible for me or my child too, to be part of that. So I think when you see examples.
So hopelessness, you're describing a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, you're just dead in the water. And then when it's working, it's spread, it's contagious. It doesn't just the individual, but affects families and evidently the community and other people. Very interesting.
Yeah, we just had a quote the other day from a parent that actually said in the quote that now my entire community has transformed and my child's life is better because of the acceptance of the community through the Kuhenza workshops. And I thought that was a really powerful statement. The entire community. Yeah.
They're blessed. They're blessed by the person who's least capable in the eyes of the community. That's where the blessing came.
We've shared this story before, I think, in this podcast, but for me personally, it was very impactful in terms of hope, is when that little girl Joyce was born in Kenya when I was there, and born without an arm like me. Her mom was hopeless, wondering what she'd done wrong. But when Leonard and our chairperson, Reverend Mongi, told them the story about Kupenda, how it came to be, they even pointed to a picture of the elephant shrew, which was the reason I was in Kenya in the first place. And they said, well, now, and they did things like tied my shoe and did things like that. I felt a little bit like I was a bit of a circus performance. But at the end of that time, the mom said, hey, now I see not only can my daughter do things like other people, I also see that maybe she could help other people one day too. So that was a moment of hope.
So I know this is a sidebar. I just can't resist it. I don't know what an elephant shrew is. I had to look it up. I don't know that many people do. Is elephant shrew, do people in Kenya know what an elephant shrew is? Is that a well-known?
Leonard, why don't you share about that? Around the forest, they do.
People who live around the forest like me and the others know about the elephant shrew. It's a very common animal. I have trapped it, I caught it, I ate it, which was against the law anyway. But
you ate the elephant shrew.
No, I ate Yeah, but as you were talking about hope, I also want to remember the story of a child called George, who was born with cerebral palsy, and he had all the stigma around. But later he came to get a special school where I was working for. Then I remember one day I told a group of pastors in front of the child, George, that George, you can be a very important person because you have all the rights. And I want to tell you, you can even be a pastor one day. And George, even today, he says that was his turning point because he was looking at himself as a useless person. But when he heard these words that you are a person like another person, you are able even to be a pastor, he said that the time my perception was changed. And George has been so powerful, particularly today, when he comes into our workshops and the sermon he gives is a very strong testimony about the turning point, and he will never forget to mention Pastor Mangi, who was by then a pastor in the school. He will never forget to mention about me, and he quotes the words that Pastor Mangi said and the words that I say, and he always says that was my turning point. Today, I don't look at the disability. I feel I'm a human being. I can do anything like any other person.
Well, this is really compelling.
And I could add to George's testimony. He often shares his story in the pastor workshops and government leader workshops as well. And people have given us feedback and said that George's testimony is often the most powerful thing in the entire workshop to change their mindset around disability.
And all of this because of a little elephant shrew. That's what's intriguing. A little girl in America wants to go find an elephant shrew, and now we have all these great stories.
I think that's even more interesting about the elephant shrew is that, Leonard, maybe talk to them about how the elephant shrew is considered a foolish animal to the people there, and they don't want to eat it. Tell them why.
Yeah, this is the secret with the God. Because according to our community, the way we view this elephant shrew is that it is an animal that easily forgets. If you are chasing it in the forest, within a short distance, it forgets that somebody was chasing it. And it changes, it walks very slowly. So all the time, people will relate you to the elephant shrew. Don't behave like the elephant shrew. In other words, don't be as forgetful as the elephant shrew. And if you eat it, we believe you also end up being so forgetful. So even in our community, we do not encourage people to eat that, particularly the children. They're saying, hey, your brain is still developing. So if you eat the elephant shrew, you are going to be a foolish boy, always forgetting things. But now you can see what this foolish animal has done to us. Without this elephant shrew, I don't think Cindy would have traveled all the way. Maybe would have traveled to another country. But likely enough, it was found within our area, and that is how Cindy came in, and that is how we are existing as Kurens, and Kupenda is also existing. I think one time we need even to look at our logos and include the elephant shrew in our logos.
Let us not forget the elephant shrew.
Well, I used to have a picture of it in the office with the scripture underneath it that said the foolishness of man is the wisdom of God.
Well, I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, well, moving on then, let me ask you, how do we define hope? You've both given kind of vivid little snapshots or motion pictures of hope in motion in people's lives. How would you define it, do you think? Leonard, I bet you've thought about this.
I think to me, I would define hope as one's expectation or expectations, or one's wishes. What do you wish to happen? And usually it's always positive and not negative. So I could use those two words to define hope.
Okay. Positive expectation.
Yes.
Good. Cindy, what would you say?
The expectation that things will improve, or the expectation that things won't be as bad as they might be currently, given what the situation is.
Oh.
I think sometimes there's actually, it was less than a month after my dad passed, and he was just 63, and it was pretty sudden for us. And I was actually sharing in a church, and I was in a place where I was probably one of the bigger points of despair in my life. And I was asked to share with the church about the work that we do and that kind of thing. And I shared a scripture, I think it was in Luke, I think you would know, when John the Baptist asked, "Are you the one?" to Jesus, asking if Jesus was the one we were waiting for, or I should be looking for someone else. And I think that in that moment, he was saying that because he was in prison, and Jesus wasn't rescuing him the way he thought that he should be. And I think that in my circumstance, I think I was feeling that way too. A lot of things were not going the way I wanted them. A relationship had ended right when my dad had passed, and I had turned 40, and things about children, all that stuff was, just everything. It was a dark, dark place where hope was very far away. But the thing that I think was really helpful with that scripture is Jesus said, and what I have found to be helpful, and from the kids, is Jesus said, well, tell him the dead are raised, that the lame are walking, the blind see. And I think that for us, in some of our darkest places, the reminder is, but look at what George is doing. Look at what Teresia is doing. Look at the blind are seeing, maybe because we got them glasses, The people are walking because they had physical therapy. Children who would have been killed are actually alive today. And those things are a reminder that there is hope, even in our deepest parts. And it's not because of necessarily always what has happened for us personally, but because we can see that our lives have had meaning, that there is hope, that things can improve, and that they are always improving. It's maybe not it isn't always about us, because even in that particular passage, we all know what happened to John after. Yes, he got his head cut off, but
Oops.
there's still
That is such a powerful story. It really, really is. And and Jesus had nothing but the highest words of praise for John. But it does raise the question, I think it puts it in perspective, what's the difference between hope and optimism? What's the difference between hope? What's false hope? And how do you go about discerning and distinguishing those? Any thoughts on that?
I think there's a difference between realistic optimism and and I don't know what you'd call the other kind. There's a certain kind of optimism or hope that people might try to share with you that just makes you angry, like, because it's not validating your current pain if you happen to be in it, and like also to say, oh, everything will be fine, which it's not. There is no promise, whatever, depending on how you define fine, right? There is hope that things will be like, there's even been times in my life where, you know, when you're in a faith crisis, I've had people tell me, I do believe you'll find your faith again. It just might look different. And that was helpful to me. But if someone said, just discounts even what you're feeling at the time, like for our kids that are going through stuff, we see that and we're like, we want to make sure we don't give them false hope that, hey, you have cerebral palsy that affects all your limbs and your speech, and one day you're going to walk and have a job and all that stuff. That's not helpful when it's not actually always possible. But we can show you that there is possibilities of improvement in your life, that you will be loved by other people, accepted, that we're doing everything we can to support and include you. What would you say, Leonard? I'm sorry.
Yes, for sure. When you are talking of hope, I want to say that in hope you are expecting good things to happen, but also you are allowing room for some challenges to happen, because you are not being 100% that whatever will happen will be good. But when you talk of being optimistic, it's like you are so sure that things are going to happen the way you expect them to happen. But when we come to the real work we do, I think there has been some confusion, because we do not want to create false hope, particularly to these children and their families. We want to give them the reality according to their children's abilities. However, now, there is another team here, and I'm sorry to say the pastors. The pastors will always talk about hope as if things are going to happen exactly the way they are thinking. So sometimes you find it's a bit tricky, because like when I stand before people talking about the children and the hope, I always want not to give any false hope. But here you see a pastor telling the child that he will be cured, or the disability will be cured, and you are very sure this type of disability, the only thing you can do is either to improve the quality of life of the child, but the disability will be there. But it's like, when I pray for you and you believe in what I'm doing, this child will even run, and it will not be possible. So I think these two hopes, by the definition, by the pastors, and the way I understand it as a person in the field of disability, sometimes it becomes very confusing when you are getting from the pastor.
Well, especially coming from a religious authority, that would be very, very confusing for people.
Very confusing.
But it's almost cruel to create a false hope for someone like that. So I kind of heard Cindy saying that optimism can be a form of denial. It can be denying the pain. But hope really acknowledges and embraces the pain and recognizes that we're not talking about perfection. We're talking about some kind of hope or improvement in the midst maybe of some ongoing suffering, like John the Baptist, for example. One writer I read was saying that you can't have real hope until you really own or face your real situation, how difficult and bad things can be. You have to come out of denial in order to have hope. That, I don't know where to go with that, but I just thought that was an awfully interesting statement.
Well, Leonard and I, not too long ago, we were talking about his cancer and the possibility of relapse, which we know is quite high. And I asked Leonard, remember this conversation? I said, what do people usually say to you when you worry? Because it's a constant worry, I know, in Leonard's head. And a lot of people say, well, don't worry about it. It's going to be okay. Like, just don't think about it. And I'm like, is that actually helping you? And Leonard said, no, that's not. And I said, here's what I can tell you. I will never tell you that it's not going to come back because I don't know the future. But I can tell you that if that happens, we will do everything within our power to come alongside you and make sure you have the access to the best medicine and treatment that there is. And there's many people connected to us that will say the same. And so that, in that case, it got very emotional, I think, Leonard, when we talked about how to save Leonard is to save many, many children. And we know that. And I think that that kind of hope to say you're not alone, there are other options. You know, as long as there is life, there is hope for life. And even, I think, as Christians, sometimes we can put our hope in what's to come after we die, but sometimes that's not helpful depending on who you are when it comes to that. I know for my brother, the last couple of years since we lost my niece, like that hope is what sustains him, that he will see Ellie again. And so there's different kinds of hope that way.
I would want to talk about an example of a friend, and a very close friend I came with in America, and this is Deche. When Deche became sick, he was given a false hope by his family members because he had been diagnosed with cancer, and the family members kept on giving him other treatment apart from taking him to the hospital. And I think this was false hope to somebody who was desperately looking for medication. But because the family members were insisting, this will cure him, this will cure him, up to the 11th hour, and I remember very well when Cindy told me, go to your friend and tell him to go to the hospital. Otherwise, if not, he's going to die. And truly, before I went to see him, my friend died. And I can believe it's just because people were giving him false hope against telling him to do the right thing, like telling him to go to the hospital. And mark you, this was not a poor family. They had the resources to take Deche to the hospital, but they went the other direction, and that is how we lost this very active board member of Uhenza in Kenya. So sometimes I think that false hope sometimes is misleading. If you give false hope, you are misleading somebody, and you will put him in a very difficult situation. Yet, if you had told him the truth, he would have known, oh, if I go to the hospital, there is a high hope that I could have good medication and extend my life.
Well, that's heartbreaking. And I guess something that strikes me is the people that were telling him he's going to be cured, there's a sense they're the ones without hope. They have a hopelessness because they can't face what's going on. They have optimism, maybe, but not hope. I don't know. I once heard a pessimist. The definition of a pessimist is somebody who is intimately acquainted with an optimist. I thought that pretty clever. Well, that is a sad story, actually. How do you foster hope? I mean, your thoughts on how? I mean, I've read different things. Is hope just come to us as a gift, or is it that we're open to, or is it something we could drum up in ourselves by self-effort? How do we go about fostering hope in people's lives? Does that generate some thoughts?
I think there are some things, like for some of us, maybe in certain places when things are hard, we can remind ourselves of the times when things were bad and they got better and they improved, or we see other people who face similar challenges as we have and how they were able to get through. I think seeing those examples. But I think sometimes, especially in the most desperate situations, we sometimes have to give people hope when they don't have it for themselves. I think we have to hope for them. And I know that in times of mine, I've had people say to me, like, I'm hopeful for you, even though you're not hopeful for yourself.
Mm.
I have the hope. And I think that it was even something. I'm like, I was in places where I'm like, I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. It must be taking a big bend or something. It's either far away or bending because I can't see it. But I think having other people that hold it for you, it can also be something. I think to say, I know, and again, not to be cheesy about it, like everything you ever wanted in life is going to come to fruition, but to say it's going to be better than what it is and I can help you to be there. I think sometimes I've seen people that almost get mad at you for not being hopeful, and that's not helpful. They're like, you know what I mean? I think that people feel like they're frustrated because I think when people just get into dark places of despair, it's hard for the people that care about them to not be able to pull them out of it. Sometimes we just have to hope for people until they can have that hope or start to see a light.
Yeah, I think you're very right, Cindy, and I want to use a practical example of myself when I was going through a very difficult time. I could see my wife as a major source of hope for me because she was always with me and always giving me encouraging words and always telling me that it shall be well, it shall be well. Even when you feel like, "Ah, I'm so down," but she's there to give you the hope. And I think it's been very, very thankful to me to have somebody who can carry the hope for me, even when I'm totally down, no hope at all, but somebody is there and seeing hope for me. So it is very true that when you have such people in life, it can be really, really helpful until when you also realize, oh, there is hope for myself. Then life continues.
And I think because we've seen so many examples of improvement in so many of the thousands of children that we've worked with. We've seen the improvements in situations that seem beyond hope. I think that's the thing that gives us hope as well. And we know, I think Leonard and I had some hard conversations when both of us thought it was going to be the last time we saw each other because Leonard truly thought he was out like a year or two ago. He thought he was done with this earth. He was that unwell. When I went out there in the midst of Omicron surging because I thought it was going to be the last time I saw it. And so we had some big conversations. But one of the things we talked about is even as we thought Leonard was facing death, we said, our lives have, I said, our work and what we've done is beyond us now. I said, I got to see our staff members leading workshops and working with the community while Leonard was unable to be around people. And I was reporting back to Leonard on what was happening. And I said, Leonard, this is going to go beyond us. And now we have confidence that this work we've spent our life on is actually going to survive beyond us, and children's lives will continue to change even when we're gone. And I think that to me is hope too.
Yeah.
Not to say, oh, you're going to get better and you're going to live. It's like, no, your legacy is going to continue on.
I can't help but just think of a larger hand in play. I mean, you're describing a situation where you realize we really don't have control of all of this, that we're part of a much larger story in some way. And I guess how important is sort of a faith dimension to all of this? How important is God to the issue of hope?
I think that for me, having grown up in the church and that faith has always been an important aspect of my life, I think some of my most hopeless times have actually been the times of my biggest faith crisis as well. Not knowing wondering if everything I'd believed is actually true. And for whatever reason, I think it's common that in moments of great grief and despair, it sometimes feels like God is far.
Yeah.
And that's a common thing, and it gets very confusing. And I had a time where I was not sure what's going to happen. I was actually thinking, one of the times that I was thinking of giving up Capenda, trying to figure out how to get it under another organization or something, because some days it can just be so hard. And sometimes the stories of loss, you think about them more than the stories of success. Even the success stories of our kids are more. You worry about how it will continue. You worry about the money. You worry about what the expectations are of everyone on you. Like, I just don't know that I can do this anymore. And I happened to go to a conference, and I actually took this course. It was the first time I took this course called Beyond Suffering through Johnny and Friends, which was a disability ministry course. And at the end of this several day course at Gordon Conwell, I was, and Johnny Erickson was there. I got a chance to meet her the first time. And we were singing It Is Well With My Soul. And I grew up in the Baptist church. I'm not like into visions or like any of that kind of stuff was not part of my experience. So what happened was even more strange to me is that as we were singing the last verse of It Is Well With My Soul, saying, Lord, haste the day when my faith shall be sight. And then like the Lord shall like the trump shall resound and the Lord shall descend, saying, yes, it is well with my soul. And so during that time, I really just started to get very emotional, and I couldn't really open my eyes, and tears were like streaming down my face. And I just had a vision. I'm still not sure what to make of it. But in that moment, I had this vision of children at the gates of heaven, children in wheelchairs getting up and walking in, and the deaf were singing. And that vision to me was like this reminder of everything, of like, again, that hope and what, and thinking of even the song, It As Well, and what had happened to that person who wrote the song, who had lost, I think he had lost his wife
and several children.
And several children, and yet is saying It Is Well With My Soul. And so it was just a reminder that in the bigger picture of things, there is that hope as well. And since then, I start to add to that vision in my own imagination. When my dad passed, and just imagined him being greeted by the kids that had gone there before him and welcoming him in and thanking him for his part in their lives being better. And then even now, I every time I lose a person, I picture them being greeted by those kids from before. Even my little niece, Ellie, being greeted by the kids that were there and met her parents, and their lives had been improved because of her parents and her getting to hear the stories.
Oh, that sounds like a valid vision to me. That's a gift right there. And that's the big story. I mean, if that's not true, then I'm really worried. That's a wonderful picture. Tell all your Baptist friends. I think that's a great...
I do. I mean, and I don't...
Tell the Lutherans and the Methodists. Tell everybody. It's a great...
Well, I'll say it's the whole point I say of the reason why is that I'm not someone who seeks out visions. And I've told that story to a few other people. A friend of mine whose mom is always seeking out visions, is more of a charismatic and hasn't had one, was almost jealous of having that. I'm like, well, it's not something I sought. It's not something I seek. It's something that I think and sometimes in our moments of despair, there are those reminders and there's hope that comes from even supernatural places. Sometimes it's through a person. My mom had someone once when she was in a place of despair. She said that she just wanted God to send her a message of some sort, and she was at the beach in her car. Literally, someone knocked on her window and said, I have a message for you, and literally gave her a piece of paper with a scripture on it and a note of encouragement when she was asking for a message.
That's him.
Yeah, well, I know. So it's
the Bible calls him a God of hope, but I think one of the things we have to learn is you just can't force God's hand. He just works on his own way, and those things come to us very often unbidden. And the fact that you weren't seeking it, to me, seems like one of the most validating things about it.
Exactly. Well, and I think one time, the last thing I'll say about that particular thing of the hope in the midst of despair is in the last week or so of my niece's life when she was dying from cancer, and my brother kind of just, he was just in a place where he said, I'm not ready. He's like, I'm just not ready for this. I was like breaking down, of course, who's ready for that? And all I could think of, and I don't know where the words came from, is that God is bigger than our imagination. I don't know what that means still. That was the only thing I knew in that moment. And and I think that that's where, with all these kids, like, it doesn't mean all the kids, their physical beings will always improve, but I think that things can happen greater than our imagination sometimes. But it's hard in that that moment to know what it might look like or how it could be used, or even how you can survive things that you feel like you can't survive. People are surviving every day in situations that we just don't think they can, but people do. Leonard, I've been talking too much, so you go ahead.
For me, hope has been very instrumental in my workplace. Always as a leader heading an organization, you always have a vision and you want to implement this vision as time goes by. But when it came to my health being so sick, it's like, wow, will I be able to accomplish this vision? Then I used to say, yeah, I hope that God will give me more days to live so that I can accomplish A, B, C, D, as far as the work of serving people with disabilities is concerned. And truly, all the time you find yourself, you have moved to the next step, you still hope that you'll be able to have more days to be able to accomplish another thing. So I think hope is very instrumental in our lives, particularly when we are serving these children, are always being propelled to say, if I can be able to do this for these children, then I believe I'll have done a good job. By the time you accomplish that, it's like, if I can be able to do this, that's another thing. Then it gives you, hope becomes, like I've said, a driving force in whatever you are doing in serving other people.
And I remember, Leonard, when we were when I was in Kenya that time when you were so sick, and I remember once I got there, Leonard looked terrible. He looked like he was on death's door, and I'm like, oh my goodness. But just as we started talking, and then Leonard started talking about the work, he started talking about the kids. It was like within an hour, Leonard came alive. It's like the kids gave him life. And that it was just such a crazy thing to see, like how, I mean, I just saw it in front of me.
Yeah, you're very right, Cindy. I was so down, everything had shut down. But I think with that conversation, then we now started talking about the children. From nowhere, within 1 hour, it's like now I became the same Leonard she knew.
Well, it's paradoxical, isn't it? I might just, if I could, just share. I don't know if I've shared this quote before, but it was so meaningful to me when I was trying to come to terms with some things about darkness and what theologians have called the dark night of the soul and that sort of thing. John of the Cross, a Spanish mystic, said the reason it's so dark is because God is so close and the light blinds your eyes. And it never occurred to me that the darkness doesn't mean God's absence, but more of an intense presence. And that completely transforms the way you look at it. So I think of you shining the light in a lot of people's eyes. I so appreciate what you guys have shared. It's very vivid and compelling. I love listening to you, and I know the listeners do too, and I so appreciate your work and grateful for these conversations. So with that, I'll close it out and wish you all the best and many more hope-filled days for you both and the people you serve. Thank you. We hope you have found this episode of An Unlikely Gift to be a source of hope to you as you walk through all of life's challenges and joys. If you'd like to be a part of the meaningful work Capenda is doing, visit our website at www.capenda.org. That's Kupenda. Thank you for listening.